right now we are going to the most important part of this evening, which I'm very glad for us to go into. So the presenter of this award that we're going to be giving to Rob is a woman that herself was honored in 2023 with the award that Rob's going to be getting tonight. She's a dedicated member of the Jewish community who is personally confronting anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred in her regular writing for the National Post and other media. Now, because of the dreadful events of October 7th, 2023, the presentation to Barbara was delayed from November 2023 to February of 2024. And we're thrilled to have, Barbara here today all the way from Montreal. So she's going to be handling this honor. So please put your hands together for Barbara as she comes up. And I will invite Andrea to bring us a trophy.
Thank you, Patricia, for that very warm introduction. In this pivotal moment of Jewish history, I really don't think that CAEF could have chosen a more worthy recipient for their 2024 Advocacy Award than Rob Roberts. And so it gives me great pride and personal pleasure to have been given the honor of presenting it to him. I feel very privileged to write for the National Post. Sometimes people tell me my columns about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism take courage to write, and I always respond, because it is true, that it does not take great courage to speak your mind about a controversial subject when your boss has your back. Courage is speaking your mind when your boss doesn't have your back, and when you risk getting canceled but insist on speaking out anyway. We're all familiar with examples of this syndrome in the domains of academia, the health industry, school boards, unions, the arts, and, if you're a fan of Jordan Peterson, professional regulatory bodies, and of course in journalism as well. Israel has done a great job of nation building, and her enemies have not. But her enemies are brilliant at marketing the big lies that feed their narrative of pure innocence versus pure evil. If propaganda had the literal force of actual weaponry, Israel would be rubble from the river to the sea, and Israeli Jews would all be in the sea. An all too willing media has been the conduit for these big lies, and in a recent column I addressed this phenomenon. No institution, I wrote, has played a more pernicious role in enabling Jewish scapegoatism than Western media. Canadian-Israeli journalist Matti Friedman famously chronicled the mutations in reportage and commentary that reflected a change not in the news, but in the newsroom, when political activism usurped the principle of objectivity in Israel coverage. Media like the BBC and the CBC don't make errors, Friedman says, and sending them corrections on their anti-Israel coverage won't help. Those aren't errors. They're the result of the press doing a different job correctly. The different job he refers to is the perpetuation of the myth that Zionism is inextricably bound up with the human rights evils of our era, racism, apartheid, and colonialism. There is no question in Friedman's mind, and in ours, that over the last decade, the growing derangement about Israel and the plummeting credibility of the press are related phenomena. This derangement Friedman speaks of is the fruit of a tree poisoned by the debasement of language. As George Orwell said, there is no swifter route to the corruption of thought than through the corruption of language. By this means, rape and baby burning become forms of resistance, and self-defense becomes genocide. Accountable national military units become terrorists, and unaccountable terrorists become freedom fighters. Unchecked, persistent corruption of language transmutes hateful thought and action into righteousness and social justice in the eyes of a credulous public. The loss of consensus around the meaning of words is a particular frustration for Jews who have historically been forbidden to defend themselves except through words. When passionate but unreliable narrative is privileged over facts and precision of language in almost all the mainstream media, we feel disarmed and vulnerable. And so, those influencers in the media who beat against this irrational current, remaining faithful to traditional professional standards in their stance on both Israel and virulent anti-Semitism, are heroes to us. And there's precious few of them. In Canada, Rob has proven himself to be first among equals in that category, and it delights us to honor him. That phrase, delights to honor, recalls to my mind the biblical book of Esther, which is unfortunately relevant to the events of the last year. The book of Esther is a fictional tale about a Jewish community in Susa, the capital city of the ancient Persian Empire. The story concerns a narrowly averted genocide at the hands of a man called Haman. In prototype, a Hitler figure with great influence at the court of Persia's benevolent but naive king. Mordecai, the book's protagonist, exposes Haman's plot to kill all of Persia's Jews. He reveals it to the king. The king is horrified by Haman's evil plan. As a punishment, the king orders Haman to see that Mordecai is dressed in fine robes and mounted on a beautiful horse, and then led by Haman himself through the city streets, forced to proclaim, "Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delights to honor." I personally thought it would be very nice if Rob were put into fine robes and sat on a horse, and that the head of the CBC would have to lead him around the city. I thought that would have been quite fitting, but CAEF wasn't sure that Rob would appreciate having to wear the fine robes. A horse was deemed impractical, and in any case, CAEF is not the king. So they settled on the 21st century equivalent, an attractively inscribed lucite statuette. A small token of our community's deep appreciation for Rob's personal integrity and principled editorial leadership in a very dark hour for Israel and the Jewish people. And now, Rob, you can come up and collect your award, which is, oh, thank you. We're going to take a picture. Okay.
Thank you.
There you go.
Beautiful. Thank you.
All yours.
I'm
Would you
supposed to
like?
give it back.
Yes,
That's what
yes,
it's
that's right.
I'm
Okay, I'll take
speaking
it
now,
down.
I guess, eh?
Yes, you are.
I wasn't nervous till you all stood up for me. Thank you to the bottom of my heart. It's lovely to meet all of you out there, and lovely to have nice people say nice things about me for a change. So a few months ago, I went to see a rabbi. I wanted some advice. At the Post, we want to get this historic moment right. We have tried very hard to get it right. Since that awful morning a year ago, I'd make the case that our news coverage has been fair and balanced, by which I mean unbiased against Israel. I'll talk later as to why that can be so hard to do in the world we live in today. Our commentary, meanwhile, has been relentless in its support for the Jewish state and in support of Canadian Jewry as they have grown increasingly unsettled. But how do others see it? So I asked the rabbi, what does your congregation need from the Post? He told me, we want to hear from non-Jews. Journalists are usually urged to try to find voices from the communities being reported on. So his advice surprised me. But I think I got the rabbi's point eventually. Jewish Canadians need to hear our support. They also need us to understand that we're all involved here. So let me say this. This award honors Andrew McLeod, our CEO, and Duncan Clark, our Chief Content Officer. And it honors Carson Jarama, the Post's managing editor, for comment, and Aline Donnelly, the managing editor for news. It honors Michael Higgins and Sabrina Mado and Rahim Mohammed, and I could go on. And it honors the columns of Rahil Raza, who I'm delighted to see doing so well. It also, of course, honors Barbara Kay. So I guess that means she's been honored 2 years in a row. Rightfully. And it honors Jesse Klein and Avi Ben Lolo and Vivian Berkovich and others. And it honors Lord Conrad Black, who founded the Post to be what it is 26 years ago this month. We are 2 months younger than Google. It also honors Rex Murphy. I want to talk about Rex a little bit. He was very sick for more than a year before he died in May, but he dragged himself to Ottawa for the pro-Israel rally there in December 2023. Rex had some things he wanted to say. And then in May, he did something extraordinary. Only a few days from dying, he wrote this for us about Hamas's horrors. I'm going to quote at length here, and there's some harsh words here, but I think they speak to what Rex wanted to say. I'm quoting. Without warning, at a music festival, chased, toyed with, beating every Jew they could find, hunted them down, tormented them, raped them, shot them, a great insensate, orgiastic jubilation over a massacre of innocent Jews of an intensity and enormity not seen since the demonic practices of Jew-hating, Jew-destroying Nazism. The greatest puncture in that useless, lying balloon of never again, since that failed slogan was first muttered. Jews massacred in their homeland, Jews killed again. This is still Rex. Hamas is in a squalid tradition. There's a lot of Himmler in Hamas. There was also the deep cruelty, the sadism of taking hostages, ripping families asunder if they did not kill them, scooping up babies, young children, keeping a special eye out for pretty girls, dragging over 250 innocent people of all ages to Hamas's web of dirt tunnels. How could a man look into the eyes of a 9-month-old infant and sunder him or her from parents? How could men rape and beat so many female hostages? When Rex filed that column, I had no idea he was perhaps 36 hours from succumbing to his various ills. His last email to me was, "Did the piece make the online edition?" What he meant was, did the maximum number of people hear him defend the righteousness of Israel? Rex was a very good friend of Israel, and this award honors him. I want to thank Andrea Spindell and Judith Benatar and Anita Bromberg and everyone else with the Canadian Antisemitism Education Foundation for honoring the National Post in this remarkable way. I also want to acknowledge Adrian Batra and Brian Lilly and others from our Post media siblings Warren Kinsella, the Toronto Sun. I went with them to Israel in January with my friend Larry Mayer, and I don't need to tell you the good work they're doing. He's not here tonight. He lives in Calgary, but I also want to thank Kevin Libin, Postmedia's executive editor of politics, who's been an important mentor, and not just on Israel. If you'll indulge me briefly, though, I also want to say how moved I am to be the named recipient tonight, even if it's very much a group honor, because this is personal to me. I'm a Montreal Anglo, and so that means I've always felt a little Jewish adjacent. English Montreal is a small community and disproportionately Jewish. It always felt like one community to me, especially as the provincial government restricted all our rights as Anglos. I went to the same high school as Leonard Cohen, a couple decades on. I had the brief pleasure of being Mordecai Richler's editor at the Montreal Gazette. I didn't change a single word. Are there any Montrealers here? All right. My first job in journalism was hawking the Sunday Express outside the Brown Derby on Van Horn. If you know, you know. When I skipped classes in high school, you could often find me at Ben's. More importantly, like many Canadians, we have Jewish family. My brother Leslie and sister Kathy, who are both here tonight, have had Jewish partners and kept kosher for a time. Many of you will know my brother from television, and I can tell you from my texts that Israel has no bigger supporter. We have other Jewish relations via marriage as well. Also here tonight are my wife Charlene and our three amazing daughters, Aislinn, Fiona, and Kate. Fiona, who is our oldest, is engaged to a Jewish guy and is converting, and we expect to be blessed soon enough with Jewish grandchildren. Got that? Okay? All right. But let me read a text Ben sent Fiona on October 6th, 10 days ago, which they've allowed me to share here. I quote, "You should be careful out and about tomorrow. It's a good day not to be out in public or at any Jewish spaces." Many people here tonight will have had similar conversations, but this is a new one for me. I grew up in a world where I heard about anti-Semitism, but never really saw it myself. If you'd asked me 5 years ago, I would have said the world had evolved in the right direction. I'd give you a different answer today. In 2022, the last Gaza conflict, I was struck by how alone the Jews I knew felt, especially those on the left of the political spectrum. The world has been turning its back on Israel, and honestly, it's heartbreaking. Infuriating, but heartbreaking. We made a conscious decision in 2022 at the Post, diving deeper on the pro-Israel template Lord Black and our founding editor Ken White set. We'd be a safe harbor for the Jewish community. Our commentary would wave the flag with special enthusiasm. I hope we succeeded at that. In the days after October 7th, we realized there were two stories to tell: what Hamas had done in Israel and what their allies were doing here in Canada. Our focus on defending Israel is because we support a free, liberal democracy that pursues justice and peace. Our focus on standing up against anti-Semitism is because Jews are undeserving targets of hatred. Standing against anti-Semitism is the same as standing up against racism or any other discrimination. But from where I sit, other media seem to have a blind spot on that. We resolved to shine a light on anti-Semitism anywhere we found it. We couldn't keep up. It's a full-time job and then some. So we cover what we can. The shooting at the Jewish girls' school not far from here on Saturday morning, for example, but then address the trends as best we can in our commentary. Our news coverage of the war is a more complicated story. We have some great freelancers in Israel who have told the stories of October 7th and of the hostages and of the displaced residents of northern Israel and more. But for the day-to-day, we have to rely on wires, and we can't always trust them to get it right. We know how the Associated Press and almost everyone else flubbed the October 17th hospital bombing. They took Hamas's word about blame and casualties. There are other specific examples of them writing first, based on what Hamas tells them, and seeking the whole story later. But the biggest concerns may just be the words they choose and the context they choose to include. They write about calls for a ceasefire without noting there was one in place on October 6th. I should note AP later did a thorough investigation of Palestinian deaths in Gaza and found that Hamas's health ministry had exaggerated them, and they reported that. So it's not all bad, just so much of it is. So we carefully vet every Mideast story, wire story that we run. Depending on the source, they can often be accurate, but be far from conveying the whole truth. We also guard for misinformation. And this gets us to the theme of tonight's event, trust in the news. Every news outlet makes mistakes. We do. I'd caution against assuming every mistake stems from an agenda. News outlets are more thinly staffed than they used to be, and journalists and editors can be overworked. But look for the assumptions behind the news stories. A very long time ago, well before I worked for him, Lord Black called Canadian journalists lazy. It made me angry. I was working pretty hard. But in the decades since, I have come to understand what I think he meant. He meant incurious, intellectually lazy, not probing conventional wisdom. And the problem has only become far worse. Our journalists are better educated than they've ever been, but they're coming out of journalism schools as activists. Many have a worldview that marginalizes Israel, and they never question these assumptions, and some no longer even attempt to be impartial. No wonder the news coverage is so often so bad. Journalists used to stick up for the little guy. Now, many can't see who the little guy is. Israel may have more tanks than Hamas, but there's much more complicated math at play. We've been increasingly looking outside the J School universe in our hiring, although I do want to say we have some excellent J School grads working for us. But many people have just stopped reading. They're seeking out alternative sources that aren't always trustworthy. At Post Media, we see trust as our competitive advantage. The Post fact checks and double checks. Trust is a work in progress, and we take it very seriously. When we do make mistakes, we correct them. We focus on things that matter to our readers, which goes beyond Israel, obviously. If you read our commentary, you know we believe that Iran, China, and Russia are using our freedoms against us. We shine a light where it needs to shine, on Taiwan, Hong Kong, certainly on Ukraine, and on the emerging alliance against Western values. We stand up for those values. At home, we're in favor of smaller government, lower taxes, and the promise of capitalism, even if sometimes capitalism has some excesses. You may disagree with our worldview, and that's fine. Everyone is better off if they read widely and decide for themselves. Everyone is better off if they read things they disagree with. I've changed my mind on many things over the years. Now, bear with me for a moment, because I've got a pitch to make. I know we're all being asked for money all the time. I'm a journalist, not a business guy, but permit me to step outside my comfort zone. If you do read the Post and you like it, I have a humble request. Subscribe. We need subscribers. I'm very optimistic about our company. We're finding new sources of revenue. We have a strong editorial plan that's working. Our audience is larger than it's ever been. But we need to better monetize that audience. So please tell your friends to subscribe. If you own a business, buy bulk subscriptions. Again, we're already successful at this. Our subscriptions were up by about 25% last year. But we need more. To be clear, I don't mean that you need to get the paper delivered, although that would be nice. A weekly digital subscription last week was less than $1. $1 is worth it. Trust me. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.